What if I told you that caring less might actually make your life better? Seriously, what if most of your stress, anxiety, and constant feeling of not being enough isn't because you're doing something wrong, but because you're giving too many fucks about the wrong things? Welcome back to Grow Leap Academy, where we decode the most impactful books in psychology, success, and self-development. Today, we're getting real, brutally real, with Mark Manson's global bestseller, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. This book isn't your typical motivational fluff. It's raw, it's honest, and it flips the script on everything we've been taught about happiness, success, and the meaning of life. Because here's the truth, trying to be positive all the time is a form of denial, and running from pain is often what makes us suffer the most. So in this episode, we're diving deep into Manson's provocative ideas about responsibility, values, struggle, and the weird kind of freedom that only comes when you stop chasing everything and start choosing what really matters. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, The Learner, we're pulling apart a really fascinating mix of your sources, all aimed at understanding how to navigate, the often messy reality of life and really dial in on what matters most to you.
Right. And our goal in this deep dive is to move beyond the usual superficial self-help stuff. We want to extract some truly core ideas about happiness, suffering, and how to find genuine meaning. Insights that are practical and hopefully won't leave you feeling like you're just drowning in information.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to start with someone who might seem like, well, an odd fit for this kind of discussion, Charles Bukowski. By his own account, he was a bit of a train wreck. Heavy drinker, gambler, the whole 9 yards. And for decades, his writing career was just a complete bust. Rejection after rejection. People called his stuff garbage. 30 years of low-paying jobs, booze, and the occasional poem hammered out on a beat-up typewriter.
What's so interesting about Bukowski, though, is the unexpected wisdom that kind of emerges from his story. After all that apparent failure, at 50, a small publisher took a chance on him.
Right.
He famously said he faced a choice: stay at the post office or starve as a writer. And he decided to starve. That leap, after so much seeming futility, it led to remarkable success. 6 novels, hundreds of poems, millions of copies sold.
It sounds like the classic never give up story, doesn't it? Believe in yourself and all that. But the material you shared offers a really interesting twist on that. It introduces this concept of don't try, which, well, at first glance seems totally backwards.
Exactly. Bukowski's initial decades weren't really characterized by this relentless forced effort we often associate with success. There's a sense that he was just living his life, however chaotic, and the writing sort of flowed from that experience. So don't try isn't about giving up on everything. It's maybe about recognizing when we're forcing things, when we're chasing some idealized outcome. The key takeaway for you, the learner, is to distinguish between genuine effort and forced striving. Sometimes just allowing things to unfold can lead to unexpected breakthroughs.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit. One of the sources talks about this feedback loop from hell, that feeling when you get anxious about being anxious or angry about getting angry. It's like your own mind turning against you. Does that ever sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely. This is a really critical point, especially when it comes to avoiding that feeling of overwhelm. That internal spiral can be incredibly draining.
Yeah.
The source suggests that not giving a fuck, and it uses that term very intentionally, can actually interrupt this cycle. Now, this isn't about being apathetic. It's about consciously choosing where you direct your mental and emotional energy. So the actionable insight here is to consciously identify when you're spiraling and make a deliberate choice to shift your focus to something you can control.
So if you're feeling bad, instead of getting caught up in the feeling of being bad about feeling bad, you just kind of acknowledge the bad feeling and then try to refocus.
Precisely. It's about accepting the negative emotion without judgment, without letting it snowball into this secondary layer of negativity. It's a way of short-circuiting that internal critic.
Okay. And this brings us to another really thought-provoking, almost paradoxical idea. the backwards law. The more you want positive experiences, the more negative experience you create for yourself. But accepting negative experiences, that can actually lead to positive ones. That really flips conventional wisdom on its head.
It really does. What's so insightful here is how it connects to our constant pursuit of happiness. The more we relentlessly chase feeling good all the time, the more we're implicitly acknowledging a lack of that feeling right now.
Right, you're focused on the lack.
Exactly. And this pursuit itself can paradoxically make us feel more dissatisfied. Conversely, if we accept that life inevitably includes difficulties, negative emotions, we might find a kind of peace in that acceptance. It removes the self-imposed pressure to be constantly happy. It highlights the idea that our internal state isn't solely determined by external circumstances. Our reactions to those circumstances and our expectations around them play a huge role.
It's like the more desperately you crave wealth, maybe the more financial insecurity you feel, regardless of your actual income. Or the more you yearn for romantic love, the lonelier you might become. It's a real mind bender.
It really underscores that our internal state isn't just about what's happening around us, our reactions, our expectations. They're powerful factors.
So with that groundwork laid, let's dive deeper into some of these core ideas. The first main point is this subtle art of giving effect. It's definitely not advocating for complete apathy, right?
Absolutely not. It's about being incredibly selective about what you choose to care about. It's recognizing that we all have a limited amount of, mental and emotional energy. And it's crucial to direct that energy towards what genuinely aligns with our deepest values.
The source gives this really vivid example. The grocery store granny getting furious with the cashier over a 30-cent coupon. Why such an extreme reaction?
Well, the explanation offered is that for someone in her situation, perhaps feeling lonely or insignificant, those small victories, like saving 30 cents, might be one of the few things she feels she has control over. One of the few things she feels she can give effect about.
Wow.
It powerfully illustrates what can happen when we lack more meaningful values to focus on. We end up getting disproportionately upset about trivial stuff.
It really makes you think about your own life, the learner. What are your 30-cent coupons? What seemingly small things might you be investing a lot of emotional energy into because maybe you haven't clearly identified your bigger, more important values?
And this leads us straight to the idea of practical enlightenment. This isn't about achieving some lofty, unattainable state of constant bliss. It's much more about becoming comfortable with the fundamental reality that suffering is just, an inevitable part of being human.
So it's not about trying to eliminate all the difficulties and bad stuff from life because, well, that's just not realistic. It's more about accepting that those things will happen and developing resilience in the face of them.
Precisely. By acknowledging the inevitability of setbacks, loss, even death, we can, paradoxically, become more resilient. As the source points out, the only true way to overcome pain is to first learn how to bear it.
Next up, we have The Misadventures of Disappointment Panda. I have to admit, that image made me smile. This imaginary character who delivers the harsh truths we need to hear but often try to avoid.
It's definitely a memorable way to introduce a core idea. Life is, at its heart, an ongoing series of problems. Solving one problem inevitably just leads to the emergence of another.
Which might sound a bit pessimistic on the surface.
A little bit, yeah.
But the key is to hope for good problems.
True.
Problems that align with your values and what you actually care about.
This is a really crucial reframe. Instead of trying to avoid all problems, which is, let's face it, a losing battle, we should focus on having problems that we actually care about tackling.
Okay.
For example, if building a business is a core value for you, then the inherent challenges, the long hours, financial uncertainty, tough decisions, those become good problems because they're in service of something you deeply value.
And our emotions play a really significant role in all this, don't they? The source talks about emotions as being essentially biological signals.
Exactly. Negative emotions are like alarm bells, signaling there's an unaddressed or unresolved problem. They're a call to action. Feeling sad after a friendship ends, for instance, might signal the need to process the loss, maybe reevaluate what you look for in relationships. Positive emotions, on the other hand, act as rewards, reinforcing behaviors that are beneficial to us.
But we shouldn't always just blindly follow our emotions, right? Just because something feels good now doesn't necessarily mean it is good for us in the long run, and vice versa.
This is where critical thinking about our feelings comes in. Our immediate emotional response might not always align with our long-term well-being or our deeply held values. We need to take a step back and ask ourselves why we're feeling a certain way and what that feeling might really be trying to tell us.
And then there's this really powerful question the source poses. What pain do you want to sustain? That's a very different way of thinking about our goals.
It really forces us to confront the inherent struggles that are part and parcel of achieving anything truly meaningful. For instance, the aspiring musician might dream of playing huge arenas, but are they truly willing to endure the years of practice, the rejections, the financial instability that often comes with it?
Right, the grind.
The pain of the struggle is often the necessary price of the reward. It's about being in love with the process, the challenges, not just the potential outcome.
It's about being in love with the fight, not just the victory.
Precisely. Our values are often most clearly defined by what we are willing to struggle for. If you find yourself consistently unwilling to endure the necessary pain for a particular goal, well, that might be a sign it isn't truly aligned with your core values.
Let's move on to the tyranny of exceptionalism. This really struck a chord with me, especially living in our, incredibly interconnected world. We're constantly bombarded with curated images of extreme success, beauty, achievement through social media, other channels.
What's so noteworthy here is how this constant exposure to the very extremes of the spectrum can warp our perception of what's normal, what's truly attainable.
Yeah.
We're constantly seeing the highlight reels, the best of compilations,
Yeah.
but rarely the everyday struggles and the vast majority of average, perfectly acceptable experiences that make up most of life.
And this constant comparison can so easily lead to feelings of inadequacy, right? Like we're somehow falling short because our own lives don't measure up to these highly filtered online personas.
Exactly. And this can fuel a sense of entitlement, a feeling that we somehow deserve to be exceptional, comfortable, perpetually happy. When our actual reality doesn't align with this unrealistic expectation, we can start viewing every minor setback as a personal injustice, every challenge as a catastrophic failure.
The source draws a powerful contrast here with true self-worth, suggesting it isn't measured by the positive experiences we collect, but rather by how we feel about our negative ones, how we cope with adversity.
This is a really important distinction. Someone with genuine self-worth can acknowledge their own flaws and shortcomings, can face difficult experiences, and still maintain a fundamental sense of their own value. They don't feel that constant need to project an image of perfect success or happiness.
There's a really telling story in the material about a principal searching a student's locker for drugs. Finds absolutely nothing. But even after this clear evidence, the principal keeps pressuring the student, convinced he must be hiding something or lying.
This powerfully illustrates how our own preconceived notions and biases can completely blind us to objective reality. The principal was so convinced of the student's guilt, based on his own internal narrative, that he just couldn't accept the clear evidence. It's a potent reminder of how our own beliefs can dramatically shape how we interpret events.
And this tyranny of exceptionalism can also play out in our personal relationships, often manifesting as entitlement, like expecting partners or loved ones to constantly solve our problems, or conversely, taking on way too much responsibility for their happiness.
Oh, definitely. Unhealthy relationship dynamics very often stem from a lack of clearly defined boundaries and an overdeveloped sense of entitlement. We might unconsciously expect our partners to cater to our every need or feel personally responsible for their emotional well-being. And this imbalance inevitably leads to resentment and dysfunction over time.
Okay, the next really important idea is that you are always choosing, even in situations where it might feel like you have no agency at all.
This is fundamentally about reclaiming your sense of personal power. The source makes a key distinction between forced problems and problems we actively choose. When we feel like a problem has been unfairly thrust upon us, we naturally tend to feel like victims.
Right.
But when we consciously choose our problems, even difficult, demanding ones, we experience a sense of empowerment and control.
There's a fascinating anecdote about William James, the famous philosopher and psychologist. He suffered from significant health problems and often felt like a failure, despite his privileged background and intellect.
His personal struggles really highlight the universal nature of suffering in the human condition, regardless of our external circumstances. People with great wealth might suffer because of their wealth, just as those in poverty suffer from lack. It's recognizing that some degree of hardship is just inherent to life.
And the short man example is incredibly illustrative. This individual was completely convinced his height was the sole reason for his dating difficulties. He chose to fixate on this as a disempowering value.
His constant self-pity and unwavering focus on something entirely outside his control essentially created his own set of problems. He wasn't even consciously aware he was actively choosing this value to define his worth.
Wow.
The source astutely points out he could have chosen far more constructive, empowering values like honesty, kindness, acceptance in relationships.
This leads directly to the crucial distinction between responsibility and fault. You are always responsible for your own reactions, your choices, your well-being, even when others might clearly be to blame for what happened.
The personal story shared about the ex-girlfriend's infidelity illustrates this perfectly. While she was undoubtedly at fault for her actions, the narrator ultimately realized he was still responsible for his own emotional state, for his choices on how to react, and for his path forward. Staying stuck in blame just kept him in victim mode.
And then there's this concept of victimhood chic, this tendency to constantly seek out offense and the temporary, often performative sense of moral superiority that can come with it. This feels particularly relevant today with social media and all.
Oh, definitely. The internet has undeniably amplified this tendency to actively search for and broadcast perceived offenses, often as a way to get attention and social validation. Now, genuine experiences of victimhood absolutely exist and deserve acknowledgement, but constantly seeking out minor transgressions to cultivate a sense of moral superiority can become an addictive pattern. It distracts from addressing more meaningful issues.
The source also strongly emphasizes the importance of doubt over absolute certainty, suggesting that unwavering certainty can actually hinder personal growth, while embracing doubt opens the door to continuous learning and new perspectives.
Yeah, if we become convinced we're always right, we lose any incentive to question our own beliefs, seek out new information, or consider alternatives. Embracing a degree of doubt allows us to challenge our own assumptions, which is absolutely essential for intellectual and personal progress.
The button-pushing experiment described is a really clever illustration of just how easily the human mind can create and firmly believe in false patterns, false meaning, even when there's no logical basis for them.
It vividly demonstrates our inherent human tendency to jump to conclusions and construct narratives to make sense of the world, even when those narratives are completely unfounded. This really underscores the importance of constantly questioning our own interpretations and beliefs.
And the unsettling story of Meredith and her false memories. Wow. It powerfully highlights how our existing beliefs and context can significantly shape our memories, even to the point where we can vividly recall traumatic events that never actually happened.
Our memories are not like perfect video recordings. They're constantly being reconstructed and can be powerfully influenced by our current beliefs, emotional states, even suggestions from others. It reinforces that critical point. Be cautious about placing absolute trust in your own recollections.
This naturally leads to discussing the potential dangers of pure, unadulterated certainty. The source illustrates this through the story of Erin, the self-proclaimed self-help guru, whose unwavering belief in her own ideas bordered on delusion and actually seemed to impede her own well-being.
Erin perfectly embodies the potential pitfalls of unchecked positive thinking and a profound lack of self-awareness. Her absolute certainty blinded her to reality and ultimately prevented her from experiencing genuine growth and connection.
Finally, in this section, the source delves into the important need to question our deeply held immortality projects, essentially, our core values, the things we dedicate our lives to in the stark light of our own inevitable mortality.
Our core values and pursuits are often driven by a subconscious desire to create a lasting legacy, to somehow transcend our own finite existence. Consciously confronting the reality of our own death can be a powerful catalyst for reevaluating those values and making more intentional choices about what truly matters, rather than being driven by an unconscious fear of oblivion.
Moving on to the idea that failure is the way forward, I was really struck by your personal experience, host speaker, mentioning entering the adult world during the Great Recession and how you described it as a kind of lucky failure.
Yeah, hitting what felt like rock bottom right out of the gate actually took a surprising amount of pressure off. I remember thinking, well, what do I really have to lose now? Every project that didn't pan out just put me back where I started, which, wasn't great, but it also wasn't this terrifying prospect anymore. It definitely lowered the barrier to just trying new things, taking risks.
What's so interesting about that is how failure in that context actually reframed your entire perspective. It stripped away a lot of the fear associated with starting new things, allowed you to pursue paths you might have otherwise avoided out of fear of not succeeding. And this connects really nicely to the failure-success paradox. The source argues that fixating solely on goals can actually be limiting, whereas truly valuing the process of what you're doing can lead to much more sustained fulfillment. The Picasso example, his underlying value being honest expression rather than just fame or fortune, is perfect.
Right. When our primary focus shifts from just achieving a specific outcome to genuinely appreciating the process, the intrinsic value of what we're engaged in, we become much more likely to persevere through challenges and ultimately find a deeper, more lasting satisfaction.
The idea that pain is an integral part of the process is another really important point. The source mentions Dabrowski's fascinating study of trauma survivors, which revealed that experiencing emotional pain is often a necessary component of profound psychological growth.
Just like physical pain signals our physical limits, emotional pain can lead to increased resilience, greater self-awareness, and a deeper sense of empathy and compassion. Trying to deny or suppress that pain can actually hinder our potential for psychological growth and healing.
The do something principle is incredibly practical. The source suggests that often action actually precedes motivation, not the other way around. The VCR analogy, where seemingly complex problems often have simple solutions we avoid due to fear, is so relatable.
These VCR questions, things like how to change careers, end a difficult relationship, pursue a dream, they can feel incredibly daunting, insurmountable in our minds. But the actual steps involved are often quite simple and clear. The real barrier is usually the emotional discomfort associated with taking those steps.
My own experience with what I thought was fulfilling wanderlust by excessive traveling really brought this home. Chasing superficial highs across 55 countries didn't actually lead to lasting significance. It was that unexpected and initially uncomfortable experience in St. Petersburg, Russia, where I encountered this concept of liberation through accepting rejection, through brutally honest, unfiltered communication that had a far more profound impact.
Sometimes it's in those less glamorous or initially uncomfortable experiences that we stumble upon the most profound learning and growth. The directness of the Russian interactions cut through the superficiality you'd been experiencing and forced a level of genuine honesty that proved incredibly liberating.
Now let's delve into the importance of saying no. The source argues that truly choosing your values inevitably requires rejecting alternatives. The rather stark example of choosing marriage versus cocaine-fueled hooker orgies certainly makes that point memorably.
It's definitely an extreme illustration, but it effectively highlights the fundamental principle. Committing to one path or set of values inherently means choosing to forego other possibilities. This applies across all aspects of our lives, from big relationships and career choices down to daily decisions about how we spend our time and energy.
The source also makes the counterintuitive argument that rejection isn't always negative. In fact, it can be a crucial tool for improving relationships and emotional health by establishing clear boundaries, defining where our responsibility lies, and not taking on responsibility for the problems of others.
Healthy relationships are built on clear, mutually respected boundaries. When we consistently take on others' problems or expect them to solve ours, it creates unhealthy, often codependent dynamics, like the victim and saver roles, where people might unconsciously use each other for temporary emotional highs instead of fostering genuine connection.
Building trust after it's broken requires more than just words, doesn't it? It needs genuine acknowledgement of the values that led to the breach and a consistent track record of improved behavior over time.
Absolutely. Words and promises alone are rarely enough. True trust is re-earned through demonstrable, sustained changes in behavior that reflect a genuine shift in underlying values and priorities.
The paradox of choice, the idea that having more options doesn't always lead to greater satisfaction and can sometimes lead to anxiety and indecision, that's something I think many of us can relate to in our modern world.
Oh, for sure. Being constantly bombarded with an overwhelming number of choices can indeed lead to significant anxiety, second-guessing, and a diminished sense of satisfaction, even when we make perfectly good choices.
And this leads to the somewhat surprising concept of freedom through commitment. The source argues that deep, sustained investment in a few key areas of relationships, career, can actually lead to greater rewards and a deeper, more authentic freedom than constantly chasing endless possibilities.
By committing ourselves deeply to specific relationships, paths, or values, we paradoxically free ourselves from the constant distraction and superficiality of perpetually exploring endless options. This focused investment allows us to experience the richer, more profound rewards that come from sustained effort and dedication.
Finally, we arrive at the powerful and ultimately perspective-shifting idea of hooray, and then you die. This section began with your incredibly moving personal story, host-speaker, about your friend Josh passing and the profound impact it had, particularly realizing that in the face of mortality, there's ultimately nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah, losing Josh was, without a doubt, a defining moment. It forced me to confront the fundamental, undeniable truth of our own mortality. That stark realization that everything in this life is ultimately temporary paradoxically freed me from so many ingrained fears and inhibitions.
The source beautifully articulates that death is the light by which the shadow of all of life's meaning is measured. Without that inevitable backdrop of our finite existence, it's easy for everything to start feeling somewhat inconsequential.
Ernest Becker's compelling theory of death terror and our resulting immortality projects, the idea that many of our values and pursuits are actually driven by a subconscious fear of our own mortality, really provides a much deeper understanding of why we care so deeply about the things we do. Our immortality projects represent our often unconscious attempts to create lasting meaning and significance in the face of our own inevitable end. Consciously questioning these projects, as Becker suggested, can lead us to make more authentic, freely chosen value judgments, less burdened by that underlying fear of oblivion.
Your experience standing at the edge of the Cape of Good Hope is such a visceral, impactful example of directly confronting mortality and gaining profound perspective. That specific moment, standing at the edge of that vast expanse, looking out into the seemingly endless ocean, it brought this profound sense of clarity. It stripped away so much trivial noise and left me with a deep appreciation for the simple fact of being alive, even with the full understanding of its eventual end.
The source ultimately concludes that true greatness isn't about accumulating external achievements or accolades. It's about our continued commitment to consciously choosing what we give a fuck about, in the face of life's inherent confusion and the ultimate certainty of death.
Ultimately, the reminder that you too will die, the learner, isn't intended to be morbid. It's simply an honest acknowledgement of the natural consequence of having lived. And the profound lesson within that truth is that accepting our mortality can actually make everything else feel a little bit lighter, a little less fraught with fear.
So, to quickly recap some key insights we've explored today. The learner. Make deliberate choices about your core values. Recognize the essential role suffering plays in growth. Take radical responsibility for your choices and reactions. Embrace doubt as a pathway to learning. And acknowledge the profound perspective that comes from honestly confronting your own mortality.
We sincerely hope this deep dive has provided you, the learner, with some valuable insights to help navigate life's complexities and make choices that truly resonate with what's most important to you without feeling overwhelmed by, all the noise out there.
So our final thought for you, the learner, is this. Considering the finite nature of your time, what truly holds significance for you? What good problems are you willing to embrace and dedicate your energy to in the precious time you have?
We strongly encourage you to continue exploring these ideas, take some time for personal reflection on your own deeply held values, and consider what truly brings meaning and purpose to your unique life. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the podcast is to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Every bit of support helps us keep creating content that actually matters. See you in the next one.